Welcome to Crossroads. The Chinese Communist Party is turning to an odd source for its propaganda: travel vloggers. Now, the CCP has been using its state-run news outlets and also other entities to promote the channels of propagandists. And while the Chinese Communist Party's, focus on travel bloggers have become kind of the face of this program, the CCP is also extending this into a broader network of reporters, podcasters, presenters, influencers, and others who it's using as tools to promote its propaganda by proxy. Now, these operations have been allowed to take place mostly in the open, but they could also run into similar pressure on things going after, for example, Russian disinformation and other things, because many people now are being charged criminally for allegedly working as foreign agents for Russia for doing very similar things. Now, first on the sudden influx of these travel vloggers going to China. The Chinese Communist Party has lifted visa restrictions for many countries, and this is causing a, quote, travel rush. Now, Chinese media have this to say. This is South China Morning Post. They say in an opinion piece, "I never expected that foreigners could become the strongest spokespeople for China. On YouTube, I've come across video headlines such as, 'China is not what we expected. I was wrong about China, so I came back.' And 'the media doesn't want you to see this in China,' made by foreign vloggers, some of whom have many followers." And notes that a China travel rush is underway, thanks in part to China rolling out a visa-free 24-hour transit policy for people from other countries around the world at all of its accessible exit-entry ports. And that's the key word here, because it only lets them into certain areas. You're not allowed to travel to some key areas, notably. And if you do, you're going to be hounded by Chinese authorities. Now, it notes that 41 such ports encompassing 19 provinces, autonomous regions, and municipalities have implemented a 72-hour or 144-hour visa-free transit period for foreign nationals from 54 countries. Now, in this piece, they actually go on and talk about, Xinjiang and how some of these travel vloggers are going there. Xinjiang is, of course, where you have the persecuted Muslim minority, the Uyghurs. And, of course, the Chinese Communist Party has large-scale systems to monitor them, track them, persecute them, enslave them, and so on. Of course, you're not going to see all of that if you're just walking through the main areas where you're permitted to go. There are key areas you're not going to be allowed to go, just like with Tibet. But, as these travel vloggers go to these places, they're just showing the part the Chinese Communist Party wants the world to see. And then they're basing, of course, the propaganda based on what the CCP is allowing them to show, which is, of course, where it gets a little complicated. Now, as you'd imagine, there's a lot more to this. This is tied to a big propaganda push, not from these vloggers, but from the Chinese Communist Party itself. New York Times said this. They said, "China in recent years has encouraged locals to treat foreigners as potential spies. It expanded its surveillance state and expelled or arrested journalists at Chinese and foreign media outlets. But it points to the carefree travel videos as proof from Westerners that criticisms about those issues are manufactured." In other words, the CCP is using these people. It notes that one individual, Chung Lei, an Australian journalist who was recently released after serving 3 years in prison in China on charges of endangering national security, has described China as a, quote, "locked paradise," where prosperity and technological prowess help whitewash the abuses of authoritarianism. And said as well, "If you are a visitor, you can have a great time biking around the alleys, trying the food, talking to locals, taking the high-speed train," she wrote this month. But she said, quote, "You forget that you are on a massive movie set seeing a facade of freedom." And it's inevitably, though, as China is allowed in more foreign visitors and cameras, it becomes harder to shape the narrative that emerges. Some bloggers have shared experiences that the government is less eager to promote. And of course, if that happens, well, you see the opposite side of it. Rather than promote you, they punish you. Now, it's basically the Truman Show. Maybe some of you have seen that movie, Jim Carrey. And he's living in a world where everybody's friendly and nice, and then he comes to realize that every single person around him is an actor, and everything is set up, and it's fake. That is the experience of journalists and vloggers and travel people going to China trying to show a picture of it to the rest of the world. Because what happens is this: the Chinese Communist Party regards you as an instrument through which it can use to promote the image it wants the world to see. This is why even journalists with mainstream media going to China can't operate there if they dare to report the truth. And of course, the CCP allows some gray area. You know, one of the ironies of New York Times promoting this, for example, is New York Times regularly promotes Chinese propaganda as well, including notably on its human rights abuses, showing the CCP side but not the actual side. Many news outlets take money from the Chinese Communist Party, notably through things like China Daily, including printing inserts of straight-up Chinese propaganda. And the irony of this, well, look, you have people on the other side promoting, for example, like Russian propaganda, which I think is just as problematic, but people facing criminal charges for that and going to jail possibly for it. But you have people promoting the CCP's propaganda with just as deep ties, not facing any kind of repercussions. Now, when it comes to, of course, these individuals going to China, this is not something new. During the Soviet Union, you had the same exact issue. You had journalists from New York Times and Time Magazine and Look Magazine going to the Soviet Union and showing this beautiful image of what communism really looks like, they were telling people. Of course, what they were really showing is what's called a Potemkin village, a fake facade being propped up by the regime that it wanted the world to see. And what ended up happening was this: journalists went there. They were approached by special agents. The special agents pretended to be their friends. They wined them and dined them and took them around and showed them the grand nature of everything they'd built, but it was all fake. It was acts. It was false images. It was, for example, fake events. It was these types of things. But these journalists, still wanting to just believe what they saw in front of them, were towing the party line and promoted the party line. It's the exact same thing right now with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, look, it's also one of those things where, again, if you promote it, if you do the thing the CCP wants you to do, if you toe the party line, they help you. They might even pay you for it. But if you don't, you face getting blacklisted or worse. Notably, I can't go to China, for example. And notably, for example, the vloggers, right, these travel vloggers and so on, who say what the CCP wants them to say, well, they're getting used by the Chinese Communist Party.